All right, welcome to the channel, guys. Appreciate everybody for tuning in for this episode here with Not Our Guy from Twitter, or X, I guess, as it's called now. I found out about you, by the way, through Method Ministries podcast, the episode that you did with him. Super helpful for those of you listening. Go check that out. I'll actually put the link to that one in the description of this. Anyways, appreciate it. I don't know if you want to give a little bit of an intro of yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I'm at Not Our Guy on Twitter, probably known better as Hitler Hated Christ. I do a lot of interactions on X having to do with anything kind of related to the dissident right. I don't really get into a lot of like left versus right politics, at least with that Twitter account specifically. But I like to focus on some of the more like fringe and dissident stuff that I see going on. Anything that's really like at the intersection of faith and like far right politics is kind of where I live and swim around. And I've been running this account. I guess it's like been like a year or two. I'm trying to think. My page says June 2022. So I guess that long.
Yeah. Yeah. You've definitely done a lot of good work and had a lot of good pushback, at least that I've seen since I've been following you with, all of this, woke right or dissident right, or, there's so many different names floating around for this group that's kind of pushing this, like, as they call it, the anti-post-war consensus, or even Holocaust denialism and these sorts of things. Right. And so that's kind of the crux of what I want to talk about today is, number one, what is the post-war consensus? And number two, how does this intersect with Holocaust denialism? What is Holocaust denialism? Like, what do you believe the motivations are really behind this sort of thing, and maybe a little bit of pushback and some rebuttal of Holocaust denialism and some of the claims they make and things like that, which, by the way, that's not something I'm very well studied in at all. So this will be definitely educational for me as well. I guess we'll start with the post-war consensus. What do you think is behind that? Or I guess, what is the post-war consensus from the dissident rights perspective in your view?
Yeah. So there are different things. So Reno, who wrote a book called, something the Strong Gods. I'm trying to remember. Exactly.
Return of the Strong Gods?
Return of the Strong Gods. Yeah. There you go. He claims that he didn't coin that term, but a lot of people reference him as coining the post-war consensus phrase. So that's kind of funny. But the idea being, and I don't know if this is originally from him or it's just kind of been morphed into this, depending on how you view it, is that since World War II, the culture in the West has rejected a lot of things on the basis of how close they were to what they considered to be Nazis or Nazism ideology, right? Mm-hmm. And that includes things like emphasis on, they would say, like white ethnic identity, maybe like German ethnic identity, things like this, a rejection, like a really firm rejection of in-group preference, and like general promotion of like liberal social values, like liberal, not just leftist, but also like classically liberal social values. People that go harder on it would say that the post-war consensus is sort of like kind of subconscious, like Marxism or communism in people's minds, and that their view, or a lot of people that use that term, their view is that since World War II, we've really degenerated in a lot of ways, and it's because of the post-war consensus. They kind of lay that at the feet of that. So things that we see having to do with sexual liberation and sinful sexual behaviors in the last 80 years, that is something they would consider to be a lot of times a symptom of that post-war consensus.
So it's kind of the idea, and I've heard people throw this around too, like this ultra tolerance under the banner of never again, like we'll never allow another Hitler again, and so we're going to tolerate everything, and it kind of pushing a back in that way against fascism or totalitarianism. Ironically, though, if you go too far towards the other direction, you're going to end up in communism, which is clearly no better. But in their mind, that's kind of what it is, and it's this reactionism against what they perceive as actually something that might have been good, that was fighting communism, I guess. Is this kind of how they view it?
Pretty much. And I mean, I actually kind of go back and forth on the phrase post-war consensus, because I think a lot of times way more is laid at the feet of the post-war consensus, like post-World War II consensus, than it really deserves. Like, I don't think, I mean, anybody that knows anything about the 20s and general beliefs about things like sexuality since the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, can tell you that like the current degeneration we're seeing is not just a direct inheritor of the fact that like the West, or I guess not the West, but the Allies won World War II, right?
Right.
That's kind of a silly way to frame that. But there are other things, like the idea that we are going to abhor racial in-group preference to like an extreme degree, like any trace of that being considered like the highest of evils. I think something like that is probably real, and I do think it was probably impacted pretty seriously by World War II. I guess my biggest thing, or my biggest booger on that is, I think that when you have a situation like World War II where so many people die, so many innocent people die, and so many countries are just completely devastated, it does actually make sense to stop and say, hey, how do we avoid this from happening again?
Yeah, right.
And I think that a lot of what gets laid at the feet of the post-war consensus as being secular was probably on some level, at least initially and for a long time, a very Christian reaction to this idea that this was a very deeply evil time in history. How do we avoid this happening again? And I think over time, the areas where that has gone too far are starting to decline. I think even since like 2016, some of the woke stuff has lost a lot of social stranglehold in the West, and I think that's a great thing. And so I'm not really super worried. The whole like we have to smash the post-war consensus, right? This is something that somebody would has said.
That's what I've always. Sorry, that's what I've always. My initial reaction to the whole post-war consensus thing, as the dissident right portrays it, to me, it kind of is what you're saying, where it's like, yes, you don't want to overreact, right? There's the overreaction there's the ditches on both sides, but to come up with a strategy, at a structural or societal or governmental level, cultural level, whatever it is, to come up with a strategy to avoid those types of barbaric sins that emerged from, fascistic dictators like Hitler. I don't see that as necessarily a bad reaction. I mean, obviously you can go too far, right? But, this is kind of where I want to lead this, where it seems like them saying that and them painting this caricature of what they call the post-war consensus is really almost a justification in their minds, or a way to make Hitler look like a good person, or make, some of the things that the Nazis were imposing or believing, as things that we should adopt again today. And the post-war consensus is that big bad boogeyman who's telling us, or that's telling us that we shouldn't adopt these things, that these are bad, like some of the racial segregation, things, or being hyper skeptical about Jewish people, or whatever it might be, or, this white nationalist, ethno-nationalist type focus. And, I think that the reaction against that stuff from the West as a result of the Allies winning is good in many ways. Right. But that stuff isn't good. We should not adopt those things. And so if a post-war consensus is merely rejecting those things, then I guess count me in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But, and that's kind of, that's how I feel about it. And one of the funny things that I will hear from a lot of the guys and the real dissident right side, is this phrase or statement that, hey, we need to move past Hitler in terms of our moral framework in the West. And as somebody who runs a Twitter account, like, called Hitler hated Christ, and I talk about this topic a lot, I agree with that. The problem is we can't do that when the left is obsessed with Hitler because they think he's evil, and the right is increasingly seemingly obsessed with Hitler because they like him. And it seems like that those are both not ways to actually escape whatever sort of stranglehold the first half of the 20th century has on our thinking, especially as Christians, right? Right.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that both sides, the far right, the dissident right, and the woke radical left, I think they use World War II to kind of create their own post-war consensus in a way, and they both make errors. Which, honestly, I've skimmed through a little bit of that book, of Reno's book that you mentioned before, in response to Lucas from Method Ministries interviewing him, and it seems like the argument he's making is, that there are ditches on both sides. And
Right.
which the irony is that the dissident right wants to use that book as like their book, and it's promoting their message, and it's not doing that. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think is behind then this like Holocaust denialism? Do you think it's intrinsically bad? Do you think that there's some positives to it? Do you think that the motives behind it can be good? Or like, what do you think it is, and what do you think's behind it? Why is this becoming so popular? Do you think it's merely reactionary against the left?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't think that denial is a good thing. I would say that I do think that that people being interested in determining and trying to figure out what the meaning of that period of history is probably a good thing. Because I think that both the dissident right and the far left have a false interpretation of what that period was and what lessons we as Christians need to take away from that.
Right.
I think the reason it's so attractive, I don't think it's a new phenomenon. There have been people that have had this belief going back decades and decades, really picking up in the modern era in like the 90s. With guys like David Irving and some of these other people.
Yeah.
And there is definitely a drop off, I will say, in, if I could call it, the quality of the revisionism, because even guys like David Irving will accept, for instance, something like Goebbels' diary, which I reference a ton because it's a fantastic document, or I guess series of documents. There's like thousands of pages of them. That directly references the Holocaust, and guys like Irving, who are considered to be like the Holocaust the
expert
denier, right? Yeah, accepts that, and a lot of these newer sort of like internet people that have just sort of discovered this whole sphere from memes. They just kind of claim that that's fake, right?
Stone Choir, yeah,
the Stone Choir guy. Actually, I have a video that I'll be probably putting out in the next few weeks about that. That goes into some depth on that.
Yeah, that'll be great.
But my biggest issue is just kind of like the quality of the reasoning has gone down. And
right.
If somebody wants to be revisionist and say, hey, I think there was I do think like millions of Jews died. And I think I just think that the gas chambers were not used to the degree that many people think they are, and that's like an incorrect thing for the public population to just believe. It's like, okay, whatever, that's fine. But I'm hearing things like 200,000 Jews died only, and it was an accident. It was an oopsie because they couldn't get food to the Eastern Front, right? And things like this. And it's like, well, that's right. Nobody serious has ever held that position. Not even people who I consider unserious, who are actually academically credentialed, like Irving, have ever believed this. And
it seems to be married to this desire. This is what I've noticed, at least online, from guys like Corey. Is it Corey Mailer? Is that how you say his name?
Yeah, Corey. I think it's either Mailer or Maller. I'm not sure. Ironically, if you look up that surname, there's a lot of Jewish people with it. I'm not saying anything. I just think that's funny.
That would be something if it came out that he was Jewish.
I'm not making any accusations. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Just Google it. I'm just noticing. I'm just noticing things.
You're just noticing things.
A noticer.
Right. You're just asking questions.
I'm just asking questions and noticing.
I noticed that this Holocaust denialism, I guess if we want to call it that, it seems to be married to this belief and this desire that they'll make the argument the Holocaust never happened, but then it seems to be married to this other claim that's, well, even if it did, it would have been a good thing, or
right.
Even if it did, this is what a Christian society should have done to these Jews that are bad, that are the moral stain on Western civilization. All these claims that they'll make.
Right.
It seems like it's motivated less by a desire to be historically accurate and more by a desire to scapegoat a particular people as the big bad villains of Western civilization over the last 150 years.
Right.
And
there is a component of it that is super, and I don't just mean like little c collectivistic, but like super big C collectivistic, in the idea that because of Paul saying, like in First Thessalonians, like calling the specific Jews in the first century that killed Christ like the enemies of all mankind, that that means that everyone with a genetic lineage to Israel for all of time should be murdered, like including women and children, right? Like these are extrapolations that are being made, and I'm seeing by various different people being made, or people carrying water for these claims. And it's just, it goes contrary to any kind of reading of scripture that I'm able to figure out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's certainly nothing in scripture that would point us in this direction, to have this hyper skepticism of any particular group of people like that. It's certainly not based on ethnicity or nationhood or these sorts of things. It's just not in there, especially for the New Testament believer. They will turn to places where Paul is, making claims about a particular group of people, or saying that he loves a particular group of people. And then they'll take that and they'll eisegete their, anti-post-war consensus or mono-ethnic nationalistic views into the text of scripture to try and Christianize it for people. And it just doesn't work. I think it's absolutely foolish. And the scary part is of course them doing that, but then them using, the face of Christianity to shoehorn into conservative thought and into the conservative movement here in America and in the West at large, these very historically inaccurate and these morally corrupt theories about a certain a particular movement. Speaking of course, the Holocaust in this example,
right?
The Third Reich. And again, I have yet to see somebody on X, on Twitter, talking about this stuff from that perspective, that's trying to have an honest, good faith discussion about something historical, or that's actually trying to be biblical. I just haven't seen it.
Well, and what it is kind of like is I see Christianity, especially among young people, in at least in the circles I run in. I can't speak for everything or the whole West or whatever, but I see Christianity as gaining ground in mind share in people's consciousnesses, and it's kind of like if you were doing street evangelism and having a really deep Christian apologetics conversation with an atheist, and you've been talking to him for like 2 hours, right? And you're really getting somewhere. And then some guy rolls up and starts screaming about how the earth is flat and how the Bible says the earth is flat. And it really does really harm that effort. Because suddenly now, after you've built rapport with this person and you've really shown Christianity to be a reasonable position, based on all these different things, and you have this process that you're moving down with this person, this person comes in and says something that is completely just off the wall, eisegetical, not defensible through scripture, and then you have to start at square one again. And that's how some of the stuff with the Jew obsession, with the Holocaust denial, all of that really does reek of this. And I don't think the only reason we ought to be against it is because of we want to be seeker friendly or whatever. Right. But it does, on a macro scale, when you're talking about ideologies and Christianity as a belief system gaining ground in people's minds, it does actually impact that. And
we're not supposed to be unnecessarily offensive to people. The gospel message in and of itself is offensive enough, absolutely, to the world. And so to add these extra biblical theories and all this stuff that we're talking about, it is like that. That's a great analogy where, you're witnessing to a guy and some guy claiming the name of Christ comes up and yells something absurd like that. It does a disservice to God. It does a disservice to our gospel witness as Christians. And so I think that, to me, at least, that's the main concern that I have with all of this stuff going around with the dissident right, is they're making a mockery of Christ. They're making a mockery of the Bible. They're making a mockery of Christianity, not only now, but historically. And, I've heard even guys like Joel Webbon say outlandish things and then followed up by, And this is what every Christian prior to 100 years ago believed. And it's just not true.
Right.
And so they're making Christianity into something that it's not. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why this is becoming such a fad. I don't know if it's just about political power or kind of sticking it to the what they see as the liberal hegemony, the system that we're under, or sticking it to the left in different ways. I don't know if it's motivated by anger or resentment or bitterness, or maybe a lot of these guys were burned by Big Eva or the SBC or Acts 29 or whatever. Now they're just trying to get back at them. And I don't know what it is, but
I think the answer to that is just yes.
All that?
Like,
yeah.
Yeah. I do. I don't think we could ever pinpoint one specific thing because everyone has various different motivations. Like some of these guys are really upset by the fact that their parents taught them dispensational theology and then they got access to Google. And now they're like, I've been lied to, right? Or you have the guys that are like, oh, my parents didn't know a lot about theology and thought the Jews were like Christians today or something silly. And then like someone sent me a meme about how bad Jews were. And now like, I really don't think it goes much deeper than that. I think that the end point of it gets pretty deep in terms of how negatively it affects people's, not just like personal lives. And I've got stories about that for sure, but also,
me too,
yeah, but also like it really, depending on how far a lot of this real paranoia surrounding Judaism and things like this go, and like a really intense hatred of Jews go, it can undermine the gospel. And one of those ways is sort of the whole moniker or slogan being thrown about of like, well, the Jews are like Christ killers. The Jews killed Christ, right? And on some level, as a historical recognition of the genetic background of the people in Judea in the first century, yeah, duh, like, yes, they're Jews, right? They were.
Right.
However, if you believe that people based on their genetics bear a higher level of responsibility for Christ's death than you do as a sinner, you don't understand the gospel, or you've just rejected it.
Exactly.
Because the gospel is contingent upon the idea that Christ willingly offered himself up for your sin. And
right, he's not a victim.
Right.
Yeah.
Like when Isaiah says like that, like our sin crushed Christ, like that, those were our iniquities. That wasn't some sort of like bizarre racial collective guilt that was on the Jews alone. And if you believe that, I don't know what the gospel means to you.
Right. And that's something I've seen with this movement, and we're getting way off track.
No,
with
yeah,
the
sorry.
Holocaust. No, that's okay. This is a great conversation. We'll kind of go wherever this conversation goes, I guess. Sorry to the viewers so far. No, I'm kidding. But like this is what I've noticed. It's again, they'll shoehorn in their theories and their certain political dogmas, you could say, into scripture that completely perverts, if not erases, the fundamental message of the scriptures and of the gospel. And you see this especially again with all this Jew stuff. It's making claims that are maybe, like what you said, historically true about ethnic Jewish people at the time in the first century. And if you go back and read the records of what happened and with the Pharisees and with Judas and whoever else, yes, they were Jewish. But the focus in the scriptures and the whole point of that isn't it's not about the ethnicity. And in fact, theologically, the whole point is that we all killed Christ due to our sin. Right. It's our sin that nailed him there. It's not our ethnicity. One ethnicity doesn't bear a greater responsibility for this than another. That's not a biblical claim to make, but you'll see them making these claims. Why? Not because it's biblical, but because it fits into their political dogmas, and it fits into this narrative that they want to use the Bible to push in various ways. And I think, again, this goes back to what you were saying, the damage this is doing to individual people, the rot that this is producing in people's souls. It's making monsters out of people. And I've seen this firsthand. Everyone that I know that's been sucked into this stuff has not come out the other end being a more Christ-like person.
Yep.
Not a single one of them. And I know several. It's made them unbearably worse. And it's sad. And so again, going back to the beginning here, I think this, if I had to guess at least, I think this is the fundamental motive of this anti-Jew stuff, this Holocaust denialism. It's not about being politically accurate. It's not about being historically or theologically or philosophically accurate and truthful. It's about resentment and anger and scapegoating somebody so we don't have to take responsibility for ourselves. It's about, bastardizing the scriptures so that we can feel morally justified in abusing other people and saying bad things about other people and celebrating the death, of other people, literally, when it comes to Holocaust denialism. So I'm getting on my soapbox here.
But no, you're good. You're good. It bothers me because it's just not true. It just bothers me from that perspective alone, but also just what I've seen it do to people. Yeah. Well, it also undermines, there are people, that were believers in Germany in that period, like Corrie ten Boom and the Ten Booms. And when you make a claim about the Holocaust being a giant hoax, or that every single person who was killed deserved it, or whatever, however you want to frame it, you're calling them liars, right? This is not a just sort of like, oh, let's think about this period of history that has no connection to actual people that lived in this time, right? These people were real people. This is a thing that happened to them. It was an evil thing that occurred. And when we feel, I guess some of these guys may feel some sort of weird secondhand embarrassment for this. This is a very bizarre thing that I've heard some of these guys express to me, that when they were kids in school, they felt like they were being told they were responsible for the Holocaust on some level, or that they were being shamed for it. That's not anything I've ever experienced. I don't know if you have, Mick.
No, are you talking about German kids? Or? No,
like in the US. I don't even mean, because Germany has their own whole other weird thing going on. But in the US, I mean kids that they read Anne Frank's diary in high school, and they felt like the point of that class was to make them feel bad as white people for the Holocaust. And
no, I never experienced that personally.
Yeah, I never experienced that. I mean, my family's German. Little known fact, this is true. My grandmother was the Hitler's Youth, by the way.
Wow.
Okay. So she was in the States, and she actually went back to visit family. And what you do when you're overseas, I think it was in the 20s, late 20s, or I don't even remember. But she was in the Hitler's Youth as a young girl. And so I have more connection to this, in terms of ancestry than almost anybody else.
Blood and soil. There it is.
Yeah, exactly. And I never as a Christian, felt like I was in some sense vicariously responsible for the Holocaust, or that this was being used as a bludgeon against me in any kind of meaningful way, with the only exception maybe being the most extreme college campus leftists that would consider all white people or something to be responsible for all murder throughout all of time, right?
Yeah, it's just not a Christian way of thinking in general. It's not an American way of thinking, and obviously America, our philosophy and our way of thinking about morality and all these things, and guilt and group identity and all this. It is a very Christian philosophy overall. It has been since our founding, at least I would argue. And it is not. We're not a collectivist people like that. We're not holding. I mean, obviously there's elements of it, and there's, especially now with leftism, which is very Marxist and it's very collectivist. And of course we're seeing this now in the dissident right, but that's not, at least in my, I've grown up here, as I'm sure as everybody else that's listening to this, we're not taught that. At least, I'm 29. When I was in school, when I was in high school, when I was in elementary school, we're not taught this collectivist mindset where you're guilty of your ancestors' sins and you're guilty of your neighbor's sins. Right. I certainly was never taught that at church. Growing up in church, I was never taught that at school. I've never even thought to think that way until now, over the last several years with all this woke stuff, this DEI stuff, this call for reparations on the left, and now we're seeing it, of course, on the right, where it's this group guilt put on Jews and put on other people. It's just like, where is this coming from? And it's frustrating watching, and I don't really know what I don't know what a proper response is at this point. I'm looking at all this stuff all the time, and I feel like we're just running, like we're a hamster running on a wheel. We just dealt with all this collectivist stuff on the left, and now here it is popping up on the right, and it's like, will this ever end? What do you think is a good biblical and American, frankly, politically speaking, approach to this stuff? How do we deal with this?
I think you really have to have as many one-on-one conversations with individuals as you can that believe this. And you've got to get really good at having these conversations and drilling down to basic principles, like really quickly in the conversation. Yeah. So when people start talking about, putting out that they believe that the Holocaust didn't occur, or that it was like the only people that were killed deserved it, and things like this, you got to start asking really pointed questions. Like you have to start asking. I share a document pretty often that relates to the amount of cremation capacity at Auschwitz-Birkenau. And this is like a contemporary document talking about, and I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but it's discussing how they need to produce more cremation capacity because the thousands per month that they're able to handle right now isn't sufficient, right? And so you have to start, in these conversations, you need to start asking things like, okay, do you think people were gassed at all? Okay, no, yes, whatever, right? You need to start asking, if they were gassed, was it righteous to kill these people? Okay. Do you think they killed women and children? If they did kill women and children, was that wrong, right? It's like, because...
But regardless of how many it was, just basic principles. Because one thing I noticed too is that their arguments seem to be, well, it wasn't 6 million, it was 400,000, as if that makes it morally better, because they're still gassing 400,000 innocent people, many of which are women and children. Why would they try to dwindle the numbers? Because they're trying to make it look like it's something better than it really was.
Right. And that's so transparently the case for everybody who's paying any kind of attention. But for people that aren't, and it's their first time encountering it, they're defenseless. And a lot of them just kind of just say, oh, you know what? The memes are right.
Yeah.
and then so that's why in these conversations, especially with people that profess Christ, people that aren't believers, like I don't even, with this kind of thing, I don't even know where you begin, frankly, because if you don't share enough of like an understanding of morality to start agreeing upon things like it's immoral to kill innocent women and children, then you're kind of just like, you can't even do anything. Right.
But if people don't understand that, I don't know how to help them at that point.
And there are people that I interact with that don't share that belief with me. And those guys, I don't even feel like I'm necessarily called to even handle them because I don't even know where I would start. But for the believers, like I could really easily be like, hey, look at this speech from Himmler, given to these Wehrmacht generals in I think it was 1944. He's talking about how they made a policy to kill women and children. What do you make of that? Is that wrong? And then the ball's in their court. And usually the response will be something like, well, if they really drank the Kool-Aid, they may say something like, okay, well, the state bears the sword. So like the state is empowered to kill who they see fit, or something like this. And then they'll even reference like Old Testament passages that they perceive as being a validation of genocidal behavior. And
like the killing of the Canaanites and
Right. Yeah. And then you can kind of go from there and be like, okay, well, like, do you think that if President Biden, before Trump took over tomorrow, decided that like all abortions, like everybody who's pregnant must have a mandatory abortion, like, would that be righteous because the state bears the sword? Right. These are pretty obvious implications of these beliefs, but unless you have one-on-one conversations and really chase it down all the way the path to first principles, you never hit that contradiction. And a lot of these guys, I'm not saying like all the anonymous accounts on Twitter, but a lot of the anonymous guys on Twitter and people that seem to block people a lot, they avoid having those conversations because they get nervous when you start getting close to asking those kind of questions. And we have to be willing to force them into situations where they are required to defend their principles on that level. And I think that's the only way to deal with it. And I've tried to, that's what I try to do.
That's what I was going to say. I've noticed on your Twitter, that seems to be the bulk of what you're doing. You don't really, at least that I've seen, you haven't jumped to ad hominem attacks on people or straw manning or anything like that. It seems to be pretty by the book and pretty straightforward, which, by the way, if you guys are listening to this and you're on Twitter, or sorry, I keep saying Twitter. I got to ingrain it in my head that it's X now.
No. See, I think it's woke to say X. All right.
Say,
I think
yeah,
it's
Twitter.
It's Twitter.
Then. Yes.
Yeah. I don't care if Elon changed it.
Right.
It's Twitter. Return. It's Twitter.
It's, I live pretty close to Chicago here, and, everybody knows about the Sears Tower, and then they renamed it to the Willis Tower, but nobody calls it Willis Tower. Everybody still calls it Sears Tower. Or Miller Park here in Milwaukee. I like they changed it to American Family. Nope, it's Miller Park. Everybody still calls it Miller Park. Same thing. Great. It's Twitter.
That's great. But I'd love to see collective consciousness arise spontaneously.
Exactly.
Very populist.
Yep, exactly. What was I just saying a second ago? I just lost my train of thought.
How to interact with these guys. I will say I do participate in some ad hominems. I like to kind of excuse it away, as I think it makes it more entertaining, and so I'm more effective that way. But
sure,
I definitely am not as gracious as I ought to be, and that's something I am naturally mean spirited, and I do find myself having to repent of that. I will say that, like, people at my church know I do run this Twitter account, which I think is a good thing. I actually wish more people who do know I run this Twitter account in real life would call me out when I get a little bit too aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good. And I think, I don't think it's always bad to get a little bit feisty, I guess. I think there's a time and a place for it. It just depends on why you're doing it, how you're doing it, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I know Joel Webbon made a comment recently, which was going around on his podcast, about mocking people. Like, there's a biblical time to mock. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I do. And of course, they'll point to, like, mocking the prophets of Baal, or pushing back against them, or Jesus saying harsh things to the Pharisees. But I don't think that's the same thing as making fun of people on the internet. And although, again, there's a difference between just belittling someone and making fun of them and ad homineming them in that way, versus being a little bit tough and being a little bit harsh, you could say, in some sense, and saying things that are uncomfortable. I think that there's a line there, and again, you're right there, where that's I think the correct attitude that you have there, where that's something I need to work on as well, for sure. Where you have to know your own heart, you have to know your own spirit, and know your own motives, and constantly be evaluating yourself and judging your own actions,
right? Which
is what we're ought to be doing as Christians, and repenting where we need to, of when it becomes hateful and spiteful, and where we're trying to do it just to get at somebody and all that. And I don't think that's good. But what I was saying was, your Twitter account, it seems to be very thoughtful, very detail oriented, very truth oriented. I've definitely spent a lot of time just scrolling through your page, reading a lot of your posts. They're very good. And you do post a lot of historical stuff, which is, I think, why I was so interested in talking to you about this in the first place, because I don't see a lot of people doing that. I see a lot of people making moral arguments, like what we've been making here so far, against the Holocaust, against the Holocaust, and against Holocaust denialism and all this stuff, and against the dissident right.
Right.
But you make strategic historical arguments that I don't see a lot of people making. And so, I guess leading into this, what are some common claims from Holocaust deniers, that they'll make? What are their proof texts, I guess you could say? What are their go-to arguments? And then what are some rebuttals to those things?
Oh boy. Okay. So this
I don't know
is
if that's
like
too much to ask.
Yeah. I mean, if a can of worms is a thing, this is like a 50-gallon drum of worms.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff. I mean, like, you've got things like the claim about, like, wooden doors at Auschwitz. on the gas chambers. I don't know if you've seen that one floating around. That one's kind of got out of style a little bit after people realized that wooden objects can be airtight. I don't know if people know what barrels are.
Yeah, right.
But that one has kind of gotten out of style a little bit. The most popular one I see now is just claims about the feasibility for the scale. So you'll have stuff about, there's no way that 6 million Jews were gassed, right? They'll say things like this. Mm-hmm. And to that you can say, yeah, sure. Because they weren't all gassed. There were a lot that were gassed. There were also a lot that were killed by like Einsatzgruppen that just shot them in the head. Yep. There were all kinds of ways.
Work camps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a quote in Goebbels' diary about a specific instance talking about shipping Jews out east and how I think the statement is 60% of them are liquidated while 40% of them are going to be used for labor. I wonder what liquidated means.
Viktor Frankl's book, documenting the work camps and all that stuff, right. And how many people died just from that.
Right. So. And so the try to just kind of like you mentioned before, diminishing those things rather than just actually directly addressing the morality of it. You've also got the Red Cross canard, which is this thing, this claim that the Red Cross issued a document that only 290,000 people died at all the camps in the Holocaust. The problem with this is that the two documents that are passed around for this, one of them has the statement on the front of the document that this is not all of the camps. And then the other one
that'd be an important information to have there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then the other one has English that people have added on top of it. That's photoshopped. And if you there are public statements issued by the Red Cross that they never released any records related to the total amount of Holocaust victims. That's not what the Red Cross does. But that's stuff you'll see pop up all the time. There's actually a great link on a blog, holocaustcontroversies.blogspot.com, where they go through, I'm trying to think, actually, let me pull it up real quick. I got it right here. They go through 42 of the different Holocaust memes that you might have seen and show why pretty much all of them are either just extremely misleading or don't make any sense at all. Another one that you may have come across is this whole claim about how the phrase 6 million Jews appeared in newspapers prior to the Holocaust. Have you seen this one anywhere? I don't know if you've seen it or not, but the idea behind it is that the Jews planned that they would tell people 6 million Jews died as early as the 20s or 1910s. So it was pre-planned propaganda. Basically, is essentially what they're saying. Yeah, that's kind of the idea. The problem is if you read the newspapers and all of those memes, they're referencing the approximately 6 million Jews in Russia being at risk from potential German occupation and advancement eastward and things like this. And you can find newspapers from that same time period that reference 2 or 3 million Jews in Poland and other places like this. So they're talking about something completely different in a way. Yeah, completely different. There's one of the claims also. They'll say something well, actually, the Jews, whatever that means at the time, declared war on Germany, right, before the Holocaust. Right. So this was just a response to the Jews going to war with Germany. This was just self-defense. And a lot of times they'll reference this newspaper with the headline "Judea declares war on Germany," which is another one you might have seen. I think Corey Mailer on their podcast, if I remember correctly, about this even referenced this in that way. I have seen that one before. Yeah, I posted about this a month ago. But if you read that newspaper article, it's talking about a potential trade war with Germany, between Britain and Germany, and how Jews didn't like how Jews were being treated in Germany. And so how they were going to start boycotting Nazi goods. And so it's a sensationalist headline for a boycott that never actually happened, a decade before it would have been relevant in terms of triggering the Holocaust. Wow. And so it's it really doesn't take any time when you get down to handling these things to just do some Googling or just read the stuff referenced. And they don't do it.
Exactly. I've
They
noticed
just
this
see
too.
the memes and go with it.
Yep. I've noticed this too. I mean, it's sort of related because it has to do with the Jew, the anti-Jew theories, all this stuff going on about the Talmud. Elijah Schaefer and this other guy posted this video. I saw it today. I was commenting on it today. I've seen many, many posts like this where they're saying, well, the Talmud says this negative thing about Christianity and this negative thing about Christ and this negative thing about the Gentiles. And they try and they make this specific claim, and you'll see this. If you guys go on my Twitter account from today, which I don't know what I'm actually posting in this podcast, so maybe that's like a thing. Maybe I'll post it. Maybe I'll post a link to what I talk about in the description here. Right. They'll make this specific claim that the Talmud was written in direct response and opposition to Christianity specifically, that it's specifically an anti-Christian document, that's like the central theme of the text. And that's just not true. And they'll reference things like, for example, this one quote in the Talmud, which it's even debated about whether or not this quote's even legitimately in there. And a lot of the quotes that these people say are in the Talmud, turns out they're not actually even in there. If they are in there, they're doctored and they're mistranslated and all this stuff. You'll see that. I've noticed this a lot while just digging into this stuff over the last month or so here. And one of the claims I always see brought up is that this verse or this quote, I'm forgetting the exact reference of where it is, Sanhedrin something or other. I think it's like Sanhedrin 59a or something like that. If you guys want to look it up, where it says,
is this the Jesus boiling in hell thing?
No, that's another one. Yeah. But that's another debated thing about whether or not that's even talking about Christ. That the word used there is Yeshu, and that's a term that's used repeatedly throughout the Talmud in many other references and many other texts that are not talking about Christ or Christians or any of that thing or any of that sort of thing. It's just a common name. It's like, John today, what I mean? Very common name that was used to refer to a lot of different people. And so, anyways, the one I'm thinking of is where it says Gentiles are, even the best Gentiles should be killed. It says something like that. Mm-hmm. And, you'll hear Elijah Schaefer or Mike Cernovich or Candace Owens or, Calvin Robinson and Joel Webbon talk about this completely. It just shows they did no research. They completely omit the context of when that was written and why it was written and who that's even talking about. Turns out, if you dig into the history of that particular passage, the rabbi is writing in direct response to post temple destruction, 70 AD. The relationships between Jews and Romans got worse and worse and worse, and there were hundreds of thousands of Jews that were killed. There was this one event, I'm forgetting the name of it off the top of my head, where I think almost like 400,000 or 500,000 Jews were murdered by Roman authorities, Roman soldiers, and all that. And this phrase, even the best Gentile should be killed, is in direct response to this event happening. And he's talking about Roman soldiers. He's not talking about, Gentiles at large and the theological Jewish thought and political thought about all Gentiles, everyone that's not. But that's how guys like Joel Webbon or Calvin Robinson or Elijah Schaefer will frame it. But that's not the historical context. It's like what people do to the Bible, critics of the Bible. They'll take verses and anecdotal, stories, completely removing the historical or theological context, and then say, see, this is why the Bible's wrong. This is why the Bible's bad. This is why Christians are evil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is exactly what these so-called Christians do with the Jewish religious texts. And I mean, you see this with the Talmud, you see this with Holocaust denial theories and all that. It doesn't seem like this stuff is done by people and promoted by people and perpetuated by people who have any interest in being historically accurate, who have any interest in truth. It's just about pushing forward some particular narrative, and they'll bend history, they'll bend different religious texts, they'll make up stories about certain people or certain historical figures to push this narrative. It seems like that's the rule. That's their law. Right. Is whatever, we'll say anything as long as it furthers our narrative about this particular thing.
And I would even probably go further, maybe even you would, in saying, like, I do believe the Talmud because it is antithetical to Christianity, like it is.
Yeah.
And there are portions that were written as response to early Christianity.
Yeah.
The thing though that people don't get about it is, imagine if we had Twitter 30 years ago, like in the 90s or something, and you were able to just archive all of the Twitter conversation between everybody claiming to be a Christian for like a 5-year period on Twitter, and dump it into a giant zip file, and just you could open it up and read it without any kind of context or whatever. That's kind of the Talmud, where it's rabbis that disagree with each other, yapping back and forth over the course of many, many, many years. And it's not held up even in Orthodox Judaism as being on par with how we would consider Scripture to be an infallible rule of faith. They don't believe that. And
or even how they view the Torah. It's not the same thing.
No, it's not. Yeah. And so that's one of the misnomers, is when somebody puts something like that out there, even if we say, okay, that passage with Yeshua or whatever, what is it? Yehu, what is it? I forget exactly.
I think the word is Yeshu.
Yeah.
It's basically the word for, it's like Josh,
It's much more generic than it comes in English. That even if that is talking about Christ, this is one rabbi in that with serious beef and hatred of Christianity. Is that representative of Jews, especially today, and what they believe? Like, a lot of these guys don't even know any Jews, right? They're not. Jews are shockingly nominal, right? Like ethnic Jews, on average, in terms of what their religious beliefs are, if they are also religiously Jewish at all, are shockingly nominal on average. And even among the ones that are not nominal, the rates of them that actually believe in hell I've seen anywhere between only 60 to 70% of them believe in hell, to things as low as only 30% of them believe in hell, depending on how you want to define it. So if you're having a conversation with a person like this, and what you know about their belief is, oh, this guy believes in the Talmud, which means he believes that Jesus is burning alive in excrement in hell, and you say that to that guy, it's like, what do you mean? I don't believe in hell.
Right, he'll look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah, because it's like, this is not like a real thing. This is just something that you pulled off the internet, and you don't understand enough about these topics, and we're misleading people, not just on an apologetic level, but we're instilling a deep sense of disdain and bitterness in people. Really, really just out of a lot of ignorance. And that's very unfortunate. It's almost hard to come up with words for how horrible it is. I mean, it's so and it makes me question the legitimacy or the integrity or the character or even the faith, speaking of those that claim to be Christians, of men who perpetuate this stuff. It makes me sit back and think, okay, you're going to sit there on your podcast with tens of thousands of viewers or hundreds of thousands in certain cases, a guy like Elijah Schaefer, for example, and make these claims as if these are factually accurate. And you'd think this man's a journalist. He understands how, misrepresenting information, how dangerous that is, or he should, right? He's been the victim of that himself in certain ways in the past. And so you'd think that they would take that a little more seriously, but they don't. Why? Because they're trying to push a narrative. And it makes me sit there and question the integrity of these guys. And I have a hard time telling with guys like Schaefer or even guys like Candace Owens. I say guys, people like Candace Owens.
Yeah. Hey, it's 2024. You never know. So.
Yeah, you never know. Yeah. If they may genuinely just be supremely ignorant, and as much as I do lean the direction that you're saying of thinking, oh, you know what, maybe it does actually seem like they just are lying. I really wonder how many of them are just ignorant, just completely ignorant, and don't know how to research this.
It's the new fad, right?
Yeah.
Kind of what we're talking about at the beginning. It's like the new thing. It's the new BLM.
Right.
It's the new thing to all band together and fight against. And these people who live online, whose businesses are getting clicks online, they need something to constantly fight about. They need something to constantly rally behind and make a big deal out of, and act like they're the they're the courageous outsiders who are out here fighting fighting the power and fighting the system. And, at one point it was BLM and the Marxist left, and now it's the Jews. And it's, at least in the past, when Candace, for example, was talking about the Marxist left in regards to BLM, she was doing her due diligence as an investigative journalist and reporting accurate things, by and large.
Right.
This is why she got so popular, right? Because what she said was continually vindicated over and over and over again. Now she's doing this, and it's like all her supposed journalistic integrity has just gone right out the window. And it just seems like it's all about clicks.
Before it was her wheelhouse, right? And now it's not. And it is, I do think there is a pandemic of gullibleness going on. And I do think like you said, it's correct. Like, people are motivated to not look into it further. But even still, I think they just also haven't been told. I think a lot of them haven't been told. I get a lot of DMs from people who will tell me things like, hey, I believed like all of this stuff about the Holocaust until I found your account. Like, I believed this for like 4 years, right? Yeah. And you're like, yo, you're like the first person that's ever sent me any information on this. And I think that is honestly a testament to how incredibly ill-equipped the right has been to handle this. And and really shows how much the left has infected the discourse, so that the reaction to these guys when they do have questions about the Holocaust is almost always to just like freak the heck out. And that's not helpful. Like, what's helpful is to just say, hey, look at this document. Like, hey, look at Himmler saying this, obviously, in this situation. That's what's helpful to these guys. And they didn't get that. A lot of them didn't get it for like years and years. And I really wonder if, like I said, like people like Candace, like maybe they're just that gullible. Like, maybe or
really they're getting paid.
Yeah, I mean, they're getting paid and they're gullible, right? It goes hand in hand, right? I don't think
money is one heck of a motivator. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a conscious enough thing, though. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever sat down with Candace and explained a lot of things surrounding stuff with like the Holocaust and the Jews. And she just had an episode about like the USS Liberty and all these things. And like, I don't know if she's ever thought about these things from any other perspective than the ones that she gets fed. So,
and I think it is, trying to give her the benefit of the doubt here and not just assume she knows all this and is just intentionally lying and she's a paid actor. That aside, that theory aside, which could that be the case? Sure, it might be. Could that be the case with a lot of these people? Sure. But, just trying to give them some grace and the benefit of the doubt here, even if it is just ignorance, it's enough of a problem to where these people should stop in their tracks and seriously consider whether or not they should continue talking about this stuff at all. If they're not going to be willing to sit down and do the reading and dig into it more than just a 5-minute Google search. And, like Calvin Robinson, for example, when he had Joel Webbon on his podcast recently, he made a comment when they were talking about Jews. They're the clip that Candace showed on her show that Joel was very ecstatic about. He made a claim. He's like, I went on Grok or I went on ChatGPT and just looked up, mean quotes about Christians in the Talmud. And look,
he did not. Is that really what he did?
Yes,
did he say that?
He said that.
No way, bro.
And I was crazy. I sat there and I'm like, bro, this is, oh my goodness.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. Really? Is there a clip? Send me a clip of that. Can you give me a clip of that?
It's in the clip that like 12-minute clip that was shared on his channel. It's like at the end of that clip.
No way.
Well, after Joel rambles, and then he says like, he's like, I just looked up here. I don't remember if he says Grok or Google or like ChatGPT or something like that. And he's like, I just Googled this and looked this up, and these are the quotes. I'm like, dude, is this how you read your Bible? Like, what is this?
Oh, dude. I'm going to have to look at that because I haven't looked at that specific podcast at all. I've seen it referenced, but I don't think I've talked about it at all either.
So. Go listen to it. You're going to want to pull your hair out.
Oh my gosh, man. But I will say though, as much as I will defend some people as being just gullible or ignorant, Corey Mallard absolutely knows better. He is lying and he's a snake. So like, that's my one that I'm like, that's my arch nemesis. I am convinced like he has no excuse.
Absolutely.
On all the stuff or a lot of the stuff that he's said. So, but guys like, or people like Candace and to some extent, even Webbon. Honestly, I actually think Webbon can get kind of like yanked out of this. I really do. I think Webbon is completely within the realm of like being able to be having like one good decent conversation with somebody about this topic and changing a lot of what he thinks.
I hope so. I hope that's true. Not only for his sake but for his viewers.
I will say, like, he signed that statement on natural affections. I think we talked about that a little bit. Did we talk about that?
Yeah, I still have mixed opinions on it. I
think that Joseph Spurgeon's a great guy. I think that was a great statement. I think it had a lot of stuff that was needed. I think in some areas it could have been worded probably differently. But I think overall it was good stuff. But anyway.
Yeah, I would probably agree with you there. I think I did like the part in there where it talked about it explicitly distanced itself from some of the certainly more extreme sects of this dissident right movement, the outright neo-Nazism and that sort of thing, and distancing itself from outright Jew hatred. My only thing is, again, and I think this is kind of what I messaged you about. My only thing there is like, okay, if that's true about these guys, you look at the men who signed it, why have they been kind of promoting the opposite for so long? And is this a way of them trying to save face or to deflect to now when anyone criticizes them about their anti-Semitic rhetoric or different narratives that they push, they can just point them to this thing and say, see, no, we don't believe that. This is what we believe. All while they're promoting this stuff anyways. Who knows, right? We'll see how this plays out. My hope is that if that is genuinely what Webbon believes, especially as far as the Nazi stuff and the Jew stuff in that document,
right?
And we can make, there's a lot of debate to be had about other stuff in there about, what natural affection really means, what kin or family, what role does that play in our ordered loves, and this is a whole conversation. But particularly the Jew stuff and the neo-Nazism, if Webbon really is against this stuff, Webbon for one example, my question to him would be, if he was sitting right here, is why have you not been explicit about that from the start?
So with Webbon, it's interesting. So I got thrown into the deep end on all of the really extreme nasty results of this stuff in like between like 2014 and 2016 period.
Yeah.
I think, and so like, I'm kind of coming from that perspective, and I've seen all that stuff operate at the level of like the UNS review and things like this. And mm-hmm. some of the level of destruction it's had on people's souls at that level. I think based on what I know about Webbon, he's viewing this in a very post-COVID era way. And he's seeing it as
the post-COVID consensus.
Yeah. He's looking and seeing these guys who are, in his view, not too far off the mainstream right that are being called Nazis. And I don't think he really understands and realizes the perniciousness of the stuff that goes really, really crazy into the dissident side.
I see what you're saying.
And yeah. I think he knows and acknowledges it exists. I think he sees it online and just thinks it's kind of like either comedic or not a threat at all. And because he's looking to evangelize young men who feel disenfranchised, even by the right on some level, for being too far right, he's willing to swallow a ton of it in order to not lose his rapport with those guys. And I think on some level, I can actually sort of share his heart for those guys, because I started this account because I really do feel for the guys that are in a lot of this stuff, and I want to provide them. Like I will proclaim that I'm a gatekeeper all day long, like, because I think I am, right. I want to gatekeep people from going into stuff that I think is actually really destructive and harms their soul. I just don't think Webbon sees that stuff as bad as it is yet. And I think it'll take time. And I think over time, he's going to see more and more of it. I think with stuff like this statement on natural affections, that's put a wedge between him and Stonequire pretty clearly with the Nazi stuff. I think he's going to start seeing those types of guys harass him more and more, he's going to start seeing guys that were in his sect and group and orbit begin to move more into Stone Choir and start hating him.
We're already seeing that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And as that happens, I think he's going to start realizing like, oh yeah, this is bad stuff. Like this is pretty bad.
Yep. We're seeing it to the point where there's many people now having conversations like the one we're having now, because, you know, you could maybe make the argument a year ago that this stuff is so minuscule and not really on anyone's radar in any meaningful way yet. It's hard to point to direct things, at least in these specific movements, that this stuff is really taking root. You could have maybe made that argument, I think, a year ago, but now there's so much of it, and it's becoming almost the central theme of this dissident right movement, where it's no longer about, at least what I thought it was a couple of years ago with the Christian nationalism stuff. I used to think it was just this push against radical Marxism and critical race theory and all that. And that's why I used to really like listening to some of the commentary Joel Webbon had. I still do really like some of his old commentary. It was overall very good as far as it pertained to, you know, the Gospel Coalition and Acts 29 and because I was in that world and I can relate to Joel in many ways in that way, and I can empathize with him from feeling kind of disenfranchised and left behind by these people he once trusted, these trusted institutions that fell prey to, you know, woke left Marxism in many ways. And I've left churches over it and things like that. And so, I get it. Right. But it's migrated from that to their own post-war consensus, which is we're now going to embrace fascism in response to this lefty Marxist communism that's eaten up institutions that we once trusted, like the Gospel Coalition or Christianity Today or certain aspects of the SBC, whatever it might be. And now we're going to move so far to the right in response to that, in reaction to that we're essentially going to become almost the thing that we say that we're against, which is, I think, where you see terms like woke right emerge. It's like saying, hey, you're acting on the right here like the very thing that you just criticized for years on the left. And so I hope you're right when it comes to Webbon. I really do. I'm certainly not as optimistic about the guy as you are, and that's okay.
I'm trying to get lunch with him. I'm trying to go to Austin next time I'm over there. I'm trying to get
you're
lunch
close.
Yeah. I feel like if I could have like a 2-hour conversation with Webbon, we can work some stuff out. I don't know. We'll see. I think that I don't actually think he is a strictly like malevolent person. I think he's caught up in something that he may be in.
Maybe he just doesn't know.
Level. Yeah, maybe. And I don't, and you know, and I think that that whole Tobias fiasco with him, that's his kind of inside baseball, but all that going on, I think that was really harmful to everybody involved. It's very much really a shame, really unfortunate.
That whole thing should not have happened the way,
yes. Yeah.
It's unnecessary. There's certainly better ways to handle these discussions, like what we're doing right now, even just sitting down and talking. And obviously we're on the same side with this conversation, but I wish that these guys, I think this is what makes me question the character and motives and integrity of many of these guys, is because it doesn't seem like they're willing to do this. It seems like
they block everybody.
Right.
they like, this video I'm working on, responding to a bunch of Corey's stuff. It'll be out in the next few weeks or whatever. The intro to it includes a segment where it's like I show just a ton of people that have blocked me on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I have always wanted to have this sort of conversation with any of these people. I just like, I would love to have this conversation, and it won't happen. And I can only think it's because they are nervous about it happening, because I think it will alienate them from people further to their right. And I think that kind of harms their credibility on some level. That has something to do with it. One thing I do try to say more often than I used to, and you can tell me if you disagree with this, and I'll just disagree with you if you do. But I think the left is more of a threat than this stuff still, and I think that's pretty clear.
Oh no, I agree. Yeah.
And so I think that like that's something that we need to reiterate when we're in this zone, because a lot of these guys are, on the real dissident side, are pretty paranoid. And I think they get the impression sometimes that because we give them so much pushback on these topics and stuff having to do with Nazism and Hitler being a Christian prince or all these whatever things, they get the impression that we believe they're a greater threat than like globalism, like mass secular degeneracy on the left, and like a push in that direction, right? I don't believe that. Like I think that what we're experiencing here, as much as it is a growing problem, is still relatively niche in terms of its total cultural stranglehold.
Yes.
And I'm just trying to like keep it from becoming a serious problem.
I think it depends on, I guess I agree with you, but I think I would add the caveat of it depends on what we're talking about specifically. If we're talking about the nation at large, what's a greater threat? Oh, absolutely. The left is a far greater threat than these people, right? Than these ideas. These ideas are still in their own little bubble, their own little microcosm, you could say. This whole movement's very small at an institutional level. It's growing with like things like American Reform or Claremont and this sort of thing. But even then, it's not really like your average Trump voter. If you go up to him and say, hey, do you support monoethnic nationalism? They'll look at you like, what? What are you talking about?
What do you mean?
What does that even mean? They don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I didn't up until maybe about a year ago. And until I started to really kind of look at this stuff like, what's going on here?
I think Trump's election, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mac. I didn't interrupt.
Oh, no, you're good. I was just going to say one more thing. But if as far as threat, if we're talking about within the conservative Christian bubble itself, I think this stuff is certainly a greater threat because there's nobody over here that's believing in transgender ideology or homosexual marriage or globalism. Like we don't believe even the dissident right people, as much as I disagree with them on all this stuff, I would be on their side when it comes to abortion, when it comes to the transgender stuff, when it comes to even education in this country and that sort of thing. I would probably agree with them on, I would almost say more things that I disagree with, but
I would even agree with them on immigration. Like,
exactly. Me too.
I would love to just completely freeze all of it entirely. Like I'm not even, I'm more radical than like 99% of people I ever interact with in real life on these topics in terms of being conservative on policy. Yeah. And so what I worry about is, as we see, and I think the last presidential election is evidence of this, with Trump winning so bigly, right? I think that's evidence that the culture is moving to the right. And I think we saw this before when the culture moved to the left under and around the time of Obama getting elected, that the left sort of overplayed their hand in some ways and let their crazies just go nuts. Yes. And they have lost cultural impact now because people have realized the woke left stuff is so just really depraved. And I worry that as things move to the right, we're going to make that same mistake and just let our crazies like take the wheel.
Exactly.
And that's what I worry about. Not that in the moment this is happening, but that just like, if we don't handle this sort of newfound cultural shift wisely, we're going to end up in some like real stupid territory.
And that's exactly, I totally agree. And I think that's kind of what I was saying, where it's like, as far as what's a greater threat, specifically speaking about the conservative movement, specifically speaking about the Christian conservative movement, and especially these more reform circles, this is certainly a greater threat because, again, we don't have to worry about necessarily people believing that abortion's okay, right? Or that socialism is good, economically speaking, or these sort of things. We all already agree that stuff's bad. That's why we're over here in the first place, right? But we do have to worry over here about people adopting, kinism ideology, or, this hyper, superstitious skepticism of Jewish people, or certain versions of critical theory or critical race theory, and these sorts of things. We now there's this video that was being passed around today, which is just hilarious. I don't know I still don't know. I need to do some checking. I was going to do a reaction video to it, but I was like, I don't know if this is a joke or not. So I need to figure out whether it's a parody or not. It seems like it is, but if it's not, then wow. It's this guy, this American reformer author, who straight up said James Lindsay is an atheist, therefore he hates Christians and we shouldn't listen to him as a result. In the same sentence, he says that Karl Marx was great and we should listen to Karl Marx and he was a pretty good guy, yada, yada, yada. And it's a stain on the church and of conservatives that we've never given this guy a fair shot. Speaking of Karl Marx hated Christ.
Yeah.
That should be my Twitter. Karl hates Christ.
I think there actually may be one. I think somebody at some point got beef with me focusing too much on Hitler and said, why don't you make a Marx hates Christ account and then like made one. So that may actually be taken.
Man.
Anyway.
But anyways, it's the irony there. It's like, okay, we're going to claim we shouldn't listen to James because he's an agnostic or whatever, but who, by the way, is not hateful, at least in my estimation, towards Christians like this. But
to be fair, he shouldn't be speaking at Christian conferences. I agree. I'll tell the line on that one. At some level. So
I agree with you. But then they'll hate on Karl Marx, they'll embrace Karl Marx, who was a militant atheist who vehemently hated Christians, who vehemently hated religion in general. He called religion the opiate of the masses. And so this is the kind of stuff that is being embraced, ironically, over here in dissident right land. And I think that poses a far greater threat than, I don't know, DEI woke stuff right now, or any type of woke leftism.
Well, the irony stuff begins to, like, I think a lot of the like neo-Nazi whatever nonsense on the internet now on the right really did start off being ironic. There are some memes that kind of point this out that have floated around. I've seen occasionally about how back in like 2016, on college campuses, we all had Kekistan flags, which I had one. I still have one somewhere. Because it was like we were anti-woke and all these things. And like it was funny because the Kyrgyzstan flag like kind of looked like the Nazi flag, but then it was like deniable and this was funny, right? Yeah. And then we all were in on this joke and this was all irony. And then a newer generation of people came along and they didn't realize we were joking. and then they took it and ran with it. And I think that like that happens in real time online.
Oh, and, I've noticed that.
Yeah. And so today's irony is going to be tomorrow's like actual belief when you get some like 15-year-old on here and like juice them up with a bunch of stupid Discord or Telegram memes,
Oh, totally. I've noticed that too. I mean, I remember like, for the last several years, people making jokes about Jewish people and Jewish conspiracies and all this stuff. And it was jokes, right? Even that. And people can make arguments that like even, I mean, when I was in college, even I remember people joking about that stuff, but everybody knew it wasn't serious. It wasn't a serious held belief. People can make arguments that, that's distasteful or it's wrong. And yeah, sure. But like, you're right where it became like you make a joke about something. Like, let's say you're making a joke. Let's say you have a friend, and you're making a joke in your group of friends that everybody hates this particular friend. And then everybody, you assume everybody's joking, that's saying they hate him. And then next thing you find out, everybody else that was saying it was actually serious. That's how it feels.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever had a relationship with somebody where you like tell like racial jokes back and forth for fun, like of a different race. If you've ever had that kind of relationship. Yeah. Yeah. If you ever have that relationship where that somebody comes in and like actually like hates like somebody for being black or like really hates people who are white, it ruins the whole dynamic.
Yes.
And that is kind of how I feel about like 2016 era, even the stuff on like Poll, where it was like, this was like really funny. And like, this is like good time. And we were just goofing off and like, there might've been some like pernicious elements on some level, but a lot of these people were really just like having a fun time and joking around. And then people just started taking it and it got not fun anymore.
Well, it's like the old saying, like mockery it can be a form of flattery, where you make fun of the people that you admire a lot of times. And so like, I'll give you an example. So for a while, me and my family, we lived in Hawaii when I was a kid, and Hawaii is like 80% Japanese people, 80% of people there are at least somewhat Japanese. Most people there, almost everybody in my class in elementary school and middle school when I was there was Japanese or Filipino or Korean or something, right? And so me and my brother being, white kids, we're Romanian, we were the ethnic minority, and people would be making fun of us for being white, like friends, and we'd be making fun of them for being, Korean or something. And it was a joke, but we were all friends at the end of the day. We were just being kids, just goofing off. And, but yeah, like I can imagine somebody coming in there and being like actually spiteful towards me or my brother for being white or vice versa. And it just ruins the whole thing. This is exactly, I think, what we're seeing, where maybe some of the joking gave these people the people that actually have these sentiments, the feeling that they have a safe space to actually talk about this stuff out loud. And maybe certain sections of Twitter now that Elon Musk has bought it, it's open more free speech, which is good overall, of course. I would agree with that.
Right.
But maybe they've taken that and you tried to use that to perpetuate these beliefs. And for some reason, it's just become this fad now. And if you spend more than 5 minutes on Twitter, you'll see this.
And autism being the joke is not by accident either, because the people who can't tell the difference between the actual joke and being like, I hate black people. Yes. Are people who may be a little on the spectrum, and maybe they ran a little wild and they didn't get checked. Maybe that's what's happening.
Right. They don't get the humor. They don't get the sarcasm. They don't get the social cues. And I think I've even noticed that. This sounds so mean, but I've noticed that even in many replies with a lot of these Anon accounts, I'll say something and then I'll get all these replies from these Anons, which I blocked so many of these. I've gotten a little block happy just with these Anon accounts specifically. If you're a normal person, just making a comment, something I disagree with, I don't care. But if it's like harassment or you're dropping F-bombs at me or calling me names, I'm blocking you. But like a lot of the replies, like I'll say something, it'll be what I think is at least people understand, oh, this is I'm being sarcastic or I'm being hyperbolic or I'm making a joke here or there. And people take it so seriously. Everything is so serious.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the solution to this. We need to get back to the joking around about this stuff, away from it being serious. I don't know.
Yeah. And most IRL conversations I've had like about this with people, they really, this stuff is really, a lot of the vitriol breaks down when you just like have a face-to-face with someone.
Yes. And
that's kind of why I want to have some interactions, even with guys like Webbon at some point, if possible, just because I think that just a normal human back and forth can do a lot of good. And when the instinct is to withdraw and block and form a little sub community that's going to just sort of like be a turtle, right?
Yep.
It doesn't help anybody. And I know it's like maybe like very, very classically liberal or whatever to be like, oh, I think conversations, will fix things. But on some level, yeah, that's actually right. That actually will. If you could sit down with somebody and work out some of this stuff. And that's really what I want. So if you ever find anybody willing to do that, Mick, send them my direction. I'd love to have 2 hours with them.
Absolutely. I would love, and honestly, with the whole Webbon thing, I pray that you get the opportunity to do that genuinely. And I pray that it goes well. And as critical as I've been of him or other people in this movement, I as a Christian, I firmly believe anybody, no matter how far down the rabbit hole they've gone and how far astray they are, there's an opportunity to repent. There's an opportunity to come back to sanity. They're not too far gone. Maybe some of these people don't. But
which one of us hasn't gone down some stupid internet rabbit hole and believed something for like a while? I mean, like, listen, most well-adjusted people do that for like a weekend. Yes. So this is a little unique. But I mean, like that's not an abnormal issue for people in current year,
Yes. Oh, I've definitely had times like that where I've just gone, I thought I was going crazy, like going down conspiracy rabbit holes and stuff. And listen, I love a good conspiracy theory, and I sure hold to frankly, a lot of them. But going back to the original conversation with the Holocaust denial and the post-war consensus and all this, when your conspiracy theory leads you to hate an entire group of people, you've picked the wrong one, I think.
Right.
And
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you. I think when it starts to undermine biblical truth or influence the way that you're reading and interpreting scripture,
yes.
Or even making you like change churches. That's one of the things that's like I've seen kind of as a badge of honor with this is like, oh, I left my church because they were too not even
PC
like
or post-war or PWC or post-war consensus, whatever.
Yeah, something like that. And it's always very ill defined, but I always wonder, is it like, you know, did the pastor say that like spousal abuse is possible or something like was this like something very benign, or did your pastor say that like that all the nations of the world will bow to Christ and that felt too universalist to you or something like this? Like, I wonder sometimes, guys, in that scenario, if they're just so fixated on this that it really is just like impacting their level of spiritual discernment. And that bugs me when I think about that. That makes me worry.
And I think, listen, I get, and we'll wrap this up here in a minute. We're going, this is pretty long. This is good. This is good conversation. I hope this is beneficial to people.
Yeah.
We definitely have to do this again, by the way. Get more into the history of all this stuff. But I'll say this, I understand people leaving churches has gotten a lot more popular. And as a result, new denominations have formed, new affiliations. You look at the CREC, for example, that kind of was born out of people leaving Acts 29 and the SBC and other denominations that were going woke in different ways on the left. I'm one of those people that I left my church because of their Acts 29 partnership, their active partnership with Acts 29. But it wasn't like a spontaneous thing. It was, I sat down with my pastor numerous times, had long conversations about theology, about ministry, about Acts 29 going in. We walked away disagreeing with each other, but it wasn't like, screw you, I'm going to leave and go and try to be a radical over here. And I don't like you because you don't, it wasn't any of that. It was I think a biblical way to handle it. I mean, not to pat myself on the back here, but yes, we had some serious disagreements about politics or about ministry and those types of things as it pertains to Acts 29 and their current direction they're going. But, it was fruitful conversations. It was biblically driven conversations. It wasn't reactionary. It wasn't hateful. It wasn't spiteful one way or the other. And so I think if you're going to leave your church and you're going to swap teams, quote unquote, number one, you're not swapping teams necessarily. If you're just switching churches, you're still all on the same team. You're still part of the body of Christ, assuming that the church you're leaving is a gospel preaching church.
Right.
But if you're going to do that, at least do so with integrity, with honesty, with honor, with due diligence. Do your homework, do your research. Don't be reactionary. These types of things. But you're right, where it's become trendy to just kind of be reactionary and be angry and just buck the system. It's not leading to good fruit.
And don't leave just because your church isn't as aligned with all of your beliefs as whatever like parasocial internet relationships that you have. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like,
absolutely.
I feel like a lot of people do build these sort of networks of people online that they in some ways hold in higher precedence in terms of like social value than their actual churches. And I worry about that too. That's a long list of things that I worry and pray about.
You're absolutely right. Again, like, for my example, and I know several people who have the same kind of story, especially as it pertains to Acts 29, even Joel Webbon, right? Like, I don't know all the history there with him, but if you're like, in my case, I left my church because they were active members of Acts 29. Acts 29 is promoting things I think are antithetical to biblical theology. They're adopting a lot of these like critical race theorist, woke left principles. They're promoting, I don't know if it's still up there, but I believe at one point they had, Ibram X. Kendi's book that they were promoting on their website. All this stuff, right? And so my reason was I want to be able to go to a church and tithe at, which we're biblically required to do in my belief, and not feel like I'm giving money to somebody that is doing things that are unbiblical with this money. Obviously, you can't be in total control of that as a member of any church, but if your church is giving 2 to 3% of the annual funds, tithing funds to an organization like that, I think that is a legitimate reason to sit down with a pastor and have a conversation. And if you can't come to some sort of mutual agreement, to leave, because you shouldn't go to a church where you don't agree with. We're like, if I don't feel comfortable giving my money to this place, I'm not going to take myself or my family or whoever there. And so that was my reasoning. And if you're sitting here listening to this and you're contemplating the same thing, sit down and have conversations with your pastor. Don't assume things about them and their character and their theology and their beliefs just because, some dissident right people said this about this particular group. Right. Yeah.
And your pastor or like, if your church is giving money to organizations that are doing things like promoting abortion, right? Yeah. There's a difference between that and your pastor not believing or being red-pilled on race and IQ. This is not an equivalent, like, moral distinction. It just isn't,
Exactly. It's not even close, right? If your pastor, don't leave a church. In other words, if you're watching this, if your pastor doesn't share your same political theories about the Jews, not biblical reason. A biblical reason would be your church is giving money to an organization that's supporting DEI critical race theory stuff. Biblical reason. You could make a biblical argument against that, right? Or to leave a church for those reasons. Don't leave your church if your pastor is, I don't know, refusing to question the Holocaust. Like, it's just ridiculous. I mean, saying it out loud sounds so ridiculous, but this is where we're at. People are literally leaving churches over this stuff. Right. And it's sad. It's sad what's doing to individual souls. It's sad what it's doing to churches. And whether or not this stuff has any sort of institutional power at this point, which I don't really believe it does, at least not to any sort of meaningful degree. This is the fundamental point that's being driven home here, is what this stuff is doing to individual souls, the rot that it's producing, the bad fruit, the hatefulness, the bitterness, the resentment, the superstitious skepticism of whole ethnic groups. It's so beyond what the Bible teaches. It's so forgetful of the gospel that we say we believe in. I just honestly pray that there's a return to biblical Orthodox Christian, small O Orthodox Christianity. And I think we've just gotten so far into the weeds. It's become all about politics and political power and all these weird conspiracy theories and historical revisionism. And it's just like, can we just get back to, I sound like Russell Moore, but can we need to reform, get back to the gospel?
We need to reform. Like, that's what we need.
Yeah.
That's what it is, Semper Reformanda. Like, we gotta keep doing it.
Right.
People get led astray. But what you're saying, I mean, amen, brother. Like, I agree. I gotta head off like here just a minute. But appreciate what you're doing and having me on.
This was good. This was good. We'll definitely do it again. For those of you again that are listening, definitely go follow him on Twitter. He posts a lot of good stuff. I'll put all the links in the description for you guys, so make it easy. But all right, appreciate it.